And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome aboard. I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook on this Friday, January 24th, 2025. We have a lot to talk about. We've had strong winds across areas of the Beaufort Sea coast as well as the Chukchi Sea coast there between Point Hope and Utqiagvik with blowing snow. Some of the winds have gusted 50, 60 miles an hour. That energy is lifting northward and should lighten up by Saturday. But as we drop south, we have a low pressure system coming out of the North Pacific that'll be crossing the Alaska Peninsula later Saturday, early Sunday, coming onshore in the vicinity here of Bristol Bay and into the southwest interior, just west of the Alaska Range. This system is going to have very warm, moist air out ahead of it with southerly flow, but on the backside, north winds are going to draw down much colder Arctic air along the west coast, the eastern Bering, all the way down to the eastern Aleutians. And in fact, as the low lifts northward on Saturday into Saturday night, areas of the eastern Aleutians are under winter storm warnings for 1 to 2 feet of snow and strong winds. Certainly could be blizzard conditions at times with that. And there is a blizzard warning for areas along Kuskokwim Bay to Nunavik Island, including Bethel, because the heavy snow will extend in a band from the eastern Aleutians right up into the southwest interior, along and east of the Yukon River. Places like McGrath could also get a foot or two of snow. A return of Arctic air is coming for early next week, and north winds on the backside of the system will help draw it southeastward. So get ready toward some much colder temperatures here as we head into the early and midweek. So in the meantime, we have this low coming on. This is yet another low in a series, but this one has an atmospheric river, a very warm, moist component out ahead of it. Heavy rainfall will fall along areas of the Gulf Coast up into south central, including the Mat-Su valleys and around the Anchorage Bowl. Could pick up 1.5 inches, 2 inches of rain. We have areas along the coast that could see as much as 4 to 6 inches of rain around Prince William Sound, the eastern Kenai, all the way down toward Chiknik. The Panhandle will be relatively quiet. Most of the action will be the western Gulf into south central and then across the southwest central interior, west and north of the Alaska Range is where the worst of the winter weather will be. By Saturday afternoon, the low is still working its way north-northeastward. It'll be crossing the Alaska Peninsula later Saturday night, and by Sunday morning coming on shore along Bristol Bay and continuing northeastward into the interior. But the snow with this system across this region is going to be very heavy. Snowfall amounts of 1 to 2 feet could occur, especially along and just west and northwest of the Alaska Range. And once that system finally gets by early next week, that's going to open the floodgates for Arctic air to overspread the mainland from northwest to southeast. So the Panhandle Saturday, we're looking at kind of a mix of winds, northeast 10 knots there, 3-foot waves, Ketchikan, Metlakatla. Southeast 10 to 15 knot winds, 2 to 3-foot waves, Stevens Passage up to Lynn Canal. The outer coast, kind of a mix between 15 and 20 knot shore parallel or coming onshore, Sitka, Gustavus, but moving away out of Yakutat Bay, and swells generally around 8 feet, though higher toward Cape Suckling. Sunday, then we have southeast winds 10 to 20 knots, inner channels, waves 2 to 3 feet. For the outer coast, winds will become more southerly once you get just south of Sitka and then curve southeasterly to 25 knots. Finally, 35 knot easterly gales by the time you get to Cape Suckling, with waves ranging from around 10 to as high as 16 feet there as you get out toward the north central Gulf. Most of the action, at least within the Gulf, will be here in the west and northwest corner. We're not anticipating storm force winds with this storm, but it will have gale force winds, and persistent at that. 35 knot southeast gales Saturday outside of and inside Cook Inlet, waves 11 to 13 feet. Southeast winds 25 knots, Prince William Sound, 6-foot waves outside of Hinchinbrook entrance. Southeast winds to 30 knots, locally stronger winds coming through Turnagain Arm and along east hillside of Anchorage. Some wind gust could be as high as 50, 70 miles per hour with this setup. And then on Sunday, 35 to 40 knot southeasterly gales just outside of and inside Lower Cook Inlet, swells 14, 15 feet. 40 knot gales there outside of Hinchinbrook entrance, and 35 knot easterly gales within Prince William Sound, and 9-foot waves. For Saturday, we continue to have out in advance of that low pressure system in the North Pacific. Winds are going to be generally southeasterly around Kodiak Island down through areas to Sand Point, as high as 35 knots there east of Chicknick. On the backside, still southeast winds 25 knots Bristol Bay, but it's starting to turn northeasterly as you get down toward Cold Bay and False Pass. Winds are going to go more northerly there in the eastern Aleutians with strong winds and heavier snow there. For Sunday, look for southeast to south gales, 30-35 knots around Kodiak Island, upwards of 40 knots east of Chicknick and southwest of Akiak with 15-foot waves. The low center will be crossing through the Alaska Peninsula on Sunday morning and to Sunday afternoon and pushing up toward Bristol Bay. So on the backside of the low, winds swing around, westerly gales, 35 knots there, Cold Bay and False Pass. For the Aleutians, check this out. Saturday, being on the north cold side of this system, because colder air is going to be pulled southward out of the central northern bearing. Temperatures will be gradually falling, but 45-knot northerly gales. Combine that with heavy snow. Forecast winter storm warning, 1 to 2 feet of snow on Alaska, Dutch Harbor, especially as you get a few hundred feet above sea level, and then you factor in those winds. There could be blizzard conditions at times. Winds trail off to the northwest, falling back to 25 and 20 knots west of Adak. For Sunday, with the low lifting across Bristol Bay into the southwest mainland, winds will be mainly northwesterly gales, 35 to 40 knots for the eastern Aleutians, falling off to 30 knots Atka, Adak, back toward Kiska. And along the southwest coast, Saturday, we have this front that's stationary that just kind of lies right here across this region just west of Togiak. We're expecting south winds into Bristol Bay, but north winds out of Kuskokwim Bay. Northwest winds to 25 knots here, St. Matthew, St. Paul, where there is open water, waves 10, 11 feet. Ice in place here, Norton Sound along the lower Yukon coast, but notice the northerly component to the wind taking shape at 20 knots. That's going to go up on Sunday. We're going to have stronger northerly winds on the west side of the state. That's going to want to pull the ice southward. You're also going to develop heavy to extreme freezing spray over this region of the southeast Bering Sea as that colder air wraps in around the low that's coming up into the southwest interior. So we have 30-knot winds from the southeast in Bristol Bay, but north winds of 40 knots out of Kuskokwim Bay, and that's why this region has a blizzard warning, because there will be heavy snow Saturday into Sunday, and that will extend inland all the way up through McGrath, areas just west of the Yukon River into the central interior. Very heavy snowfall with this storm again. And then for the far north, we find winds on Saturday, Bering Strait, lower Chukchi, westerly 10 to 15 knots, and then southwest 25 knots there north of Point Lay to Utqiagvik, and then west-northwest winds 20 to 15 knots there toward Kaktovik. Winds will not be as strong as what they were Thursday night into Friday. However, as we get into Sunday, the Arctic air is going to make inroads south and eastward. These regions here will be below zero, certainly for Monday morning, and that Arctic air will spread southeastward across the mainland in the week ahead. So we have north and westerly winds to do that. Along the Beaufort Sea coast, 20 to 30 knot winds, ice in place there. Kaktovik with some stronger winds, probably some blowing snow with that 30 knot wind. And then these north winds of 20 to 25 knots, some locally higher gusts drawing that Arctic air from Siberia south and southeastward along the west coast. So there could be some polynias open, or there any open spots that any of the water will result in some heavier freezing spray. So pretty significant change in the pattern from this milder weather we've enjoyed for some time now, but we're going to see a brief, at least week or so, of below normal temperatures envelop much of the state coming up here next week into the early part of February.